Senator John Kennedy made one thing very clear to Secretary Lutnick. He said there is no right to put United States taxpayer money at risk, especially when internet access can already be provided for as little as $600 per person. So the question becomes simple. Why approve deals that cost up to $4,000 instead? Why choose the more expensive option when a cheaper alternative is already available? And that leads to a much bigger question. What is the reality behind this decision? Was this purely a policy choice, or were these decisions made in a way that benefited certain companies? And was there any personal or institutional incentive tied to those choices? First, let's watch this Senate hearing clip. After that, we'll break down what the record actually shows.
Final question, I'm going to hurry, Mr. Chairman. Why don't you just use satellite internet service? Why don't you just use Global Star or Starlink? You said the cost is $4,000 per person in Louisiana. For $600, you can buy a Starlink terminal. Why don't you just do that? And do it across America and save a bunch of money.
The states were responsible for determining the best outcome, and sometimes fiber in a dense location can be economically better. Sometimes satellite does not work best on geography.
It can't be cheaper. That's impossible. It can be cheaper.
Math is, each of the states did their best. We worked it out with them, and we moved on.
I just don't understand. You can buy, I'm not saying do Musk. There are others that just throw it out for bid. But $600 for a terminal versus $4,000 for fiber optic? This is taxpayer money. I'm done. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chairman. I should have known it's you, Shelley. You're much nicer than Jerry. He would have cut me off.
Yeah, Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
According to the record, billions of dollars were approved for broadband expansion in the United States to ensure that rural areas, remote communities, and low-income regions could gain access to reliable, high-speed internet. This goal itself was not controversial. It had bipartisan support because internet access is now considered essential infrastructure. The real question was never whether broadband should be expanded, but how it should be delivered and at what cost. The government essentially had two primary paths. One was fiber optic infrastructure, widely viewed as a long-term, high-capacity solution. The other was satellite-based internet, which can be deployed quickly and at a significantly lower upfront cost. On paper, fiber was described as more future-proof. However, the record also shows that the initial cost of fiber installations turned out to be substantially higher in many areas. In several states, per-person costs were reported in the range of $3,000 to $4,000. These figures included road excavation, labor, permitting, construction delays, and geographic challenges. By comparison, satellite internet in some regions could be provided for only a few $100s per person. This gap is where concerns about cost begin to emerge. The question raised during the Senate hearing was not an accusation of illegal conduct. It was a financial and policy question. When a cheaper and workable option exists, why was the more expensive path chosen so often? According to the record, the government's response was that states were given discretion. Each state evaluated its own geography, population density, and long-term needs before selecting an approach. On paper, this was a decentralized process, not a single top-down directive. But the record also indicates that in multiple cases, cost-benefit analysis was not applied with sufficient rigor. Internal reviews and oversight reports pointed out that satellite or hybrid models were often treated as secondary options, even in areas where they could have delivered reliable service at a much lower cost. This is where the math is math argument comes into focus. It is not an emotional claim, it is a fiscal one. When taxpayer money is involved, decision makers are expected to ask whether the same outcome could be achieved for less. The record does not show that laws were broken, but it does suggest that oversight of spending could have been tighter. When examining Lutnick's role through the lens of the record, it is important to be precise. There are no criminal charges, no court rulings, and no official findings that allege illegal behavior. However, the record does show that during his period of oversight, implementation frameworks for broadband programs were approved. Those frameworks allowed states to adopt a fiber-first approach. This is why the debate centers on impact rather than intent. The question is not whether wrongdoing occurred, but how these decisions affected overall costs. When officials stated that satellite service does not work well in all geographic conditions, that claim is not technically incorrect. In mountainous regions, dense forests, or areas with extreme weather, satellite reliability can be limited. At the same time, the record shows that there were many areas where these limitations did not apply, yet cheaper alternatives were still not prioritized. This is where policy judgment becomes the focal point of scrutiny. On one side, the government argues that long-term infrastructure investment is necessary. On the other, critics ask whether that logic justified the cost in every case. This debate resonates with the public because it connects directly to everyday concerns. Inflation, taxes, and government spending are already major issues for American households. When people hear that thousands of dollars per person were spent on connectivity projects, it naturally raises questions about whether those funds were used efficiently. Based strictly on the record, this situation does not amount to a confirmed scandal. What it does show is that there were gaps in oversight and cost control, and that is precisely the role of a Senate hearing. It is not a courtroom. No one is sentenced. Instead, questions are placed on the record so future policies can be adjusted. Historically, hearings like this often lead to stronger audits, more detailed cost reviews, and clearer guidance for states. The intent is to ensure that future projects deliver results while minimizing unnecessary expense to taxpayers. When looking at the record as a whole, one conclusion becomes clear. This is not a story about assigning blame to a single individual. It is a story about how large-scale government decisions are made and how their financial consequences affect millions of people. When alternatives exist, it is reasonable to ask why the most expensive option was selected. That is why this clip gained attention. It is not simply a debate about internet technology. It is a debate about trust. It is about whether government institutions are exercising the level of financial discipline that taxpayers expect. The record also suggests that broadband programs may face increased scrutiny going forward. Satellite and hybrid models could receive more serious consideration, particularly in regions where they provide reliable service at a lower cost. This indicates that the issue is far from settled. It remains an ongoing policy discussion. And that is the bottom line of this breakdown. This is not about allegations. It is about accountability. It is about ensuring that every taxpayer dollar is spent thoughtfully and with clear justification. If you found this video useful, please support the channel by subscribing, liking the video, and sharing your thoughts in the comments.